By now I'm sure that people watching my videos are a little sick of anime content coming directly from my brain hole straight to the cesspool of a website, but I for one am sick of not continuing my Fairy Tail arc analysis series because, honestly, it's just fun for me. I like taking entire arcs of a shonen anime, distilling them down into their most basic, understandable forms, making a couple haha funnies every now and then, and pointing out the strengths and flaws of the resulting goop that I receive. And it's going to get especially challenging and time-consuming as we go, because the arcs just keep getting longer and longer. But that's a problem for another day, and while we have the time on this day, let me welcome you back to the series. Last video, I went over the fairly decent Galuna Island arc and how it actually tries to make sense of its theming, and now that the plot may or may not be moving forward, and since the anime has long since ended by now, I really ought to keep this series going. So here we go, the Phantom Lord arc begins. After coming back from a job that was totally unrelated to Galuna Island, I cut it out because it's filler, the gang comes back to their guild hall in ruin. Giant metal beams have completely eviscerated the whole of the building, causing everyone to live in the basement for shelter. And they sit there in utter shock, wondering out loud who could have possibly done this.
It was Phantom.
Or just completely undercut the mystery, sure, whatever. Honestly though, this isn't meant to be a whodunit kind of arc, so despite how jarring I found that cutaway, it doesn't hurt the product any. So the people responsible for this extreme property damage belong to a rival guild of Fairy Tail, Phantom Lord. As we find out later, it's specifically one member, who's currently interrupting the males of Team Shadowgear, Jet and Droy, busy being overly enthusiastic about protecting the female of the team, Lucy's friend Levi, to beat the ever-loving hell out of them while Natsu, Gran, and Urza invade Lucy's personal privacy because strength in numbers and all that. Who is this person exactly? He's known as Black Steel Gajeel, an Iron Dragon Slayer with some serious piercings, a perpetual scowl, and a thirst for the blood of Fairy Tail that he needs to satiate, as is demonstrated with the aftermath of his attack on Team Shadowgear revealed to us the next day. And to the members of Fairy Tail, this is the final straw. Master Makarov may have been okay with their guild hall being destroyed, but now that members of the guild have been made into an example, he snaps, and now it's time for a civil war. Not the Captain America one, or the 1800s one, or the one that people may or may not be calling for now? Alright, never mind. Over at the Phantom Lord Guild Hall, we get introduced to these characters just long enough to make it really funny when the front door gets blasted in, burning them alive, and introducing the cavalry that is the Fairy Tail Guild. Except for the fact that in this shot, literally everyone except Natsu is off-model. And this isn't a frame of animation, like a smear. It's a single, complete drawing that the camera focuses on for nearly 5 full seconds to show an important plot revelation. It might be difficult to notice this at first, since the image has a bit of a sketchy storybook-style filter over it, which actually looks pretty good all things considered, though that's just my opinion. But it's clear to me that A1 Pictures really just refused to care enough to make the shot as close to full detail as possible. Whatever. Overall, this scene doesn't mean that much. It's another fight scene with kick-ass music and lackluster visuals, namely tons of stills instead of actual movement, with some camera shakes to make it look a bit less shitty. Hey, at least the sound design is pretty good. During this, Lucy gets kidnapped by Juvia of the Great Sea and Soul of the Earth, both members of Phantom Lord's Element 4. Think of the Element 4 as Phantom Lord's elite task force, similar to the rank of S-Class. Although technically Juvia is the only one who does anything here, Soul just kinda wiggles around with the hilarious French accent of the dub.
Juvia, mon petit ami, you mustn't shy away from the task at hand.
Back to the Phantom Lord raid, the only parts relevant to the plot are that the Master Josei is just a projection because he's really somewhere else, and Makarov gets his magic energy sapped out all at once by Arya of the Heavens, another member of the Element 4. And if anyone can explain to me why Arya is the only one who can use Drain, I'd love to hear it, because the show's only explanation is that Arya has the ability to make other wizards' power disappear into thin air, which is only true in that he has access to a spell that does that. It's not an Arya-only ability, it's a magic spell that anyone who knows air-based magic could conceivably cast at some point. Hell, even Aragorn could probably cast it. This causes Fairy Tail to flee the scene, and only exists to remove the most powerful person from the equation, which is a smart way to wage war that will set up for the bulk of the arc's story. Natsu is the only person who doesn't retreat, and it's only because he steals a member of Phantom Lord to figure out where Lucy is being held captive. And since this next scene is where the show gives half of an explanation of Josei's motivations in double the time, let me do his job for him and lay it all out. Attacking the Fairy Tale Guild and bringing the Guildmaster to near death is simply a means to an end. That end being the recovery of Lucy, because she's the daughter of the incredibly wealthy and inexplicably shitty Heartfilia family. Well, rather, her father is both those things. Her mother's been a little too dead over the past decade to help fix her husband's shittiness. And all this is apparently worth it because her father decided to hire Phantom Lord to bring Lucy home to the Heartfilia house. Not sure what bringing a runaway daughter back home to her family has to do with destruction of public property and 4 separate counts of assault, one of which we could add attempted murder onto since Drain is basically a death sentence for powerful wizards, but sure, why not, let's just throw this into and hope it doesn't get any worse. So Lucy gets bored of kicking Josei in the dick and decides to jump out of the multiple story tower she's in. The exact height kept changing from shot to shot, it's anywhere from 4 to 15, just in time for Natsu to possibly misunderstand how physics works and sprint several hundred feet uphill in the time it takes for Lucy to fall maybe 90% of those stories, because even though the show gave us no indication that he was anywhere near her, she somehow heard him in the distance. No, not even gonna question it this time. Anyway, one decent cry later, everyone's back at the guild hall, minus Makarov and these 2 guild members whose gimmick is that they use guns magic. Yes, they have guns, but those guns are magic. They took Makarov to this woman named Poorly Yusuka because she's the only one who can heal him. She also hates humanity for some reason.
Why are you still here?
I'm sorry, but I thought you were talking to us all this time, ma'am.
Of course I wasn't. I can't stand the stink of you. Get out of here already. Go on, move it.
We also hear that Drain made his magic power drift along the winds until it disappears completely, which is just about the worst example of tying poetic wording onto the mechanics of a spell, but the point is Makarov's out of commission, so let's just move on. Over at the guild hall, Lucy starts talking about how maybe she should just go back home, because at least that way that deranged asshole Josei will stop hurting her friends. But that would literally make his plan completely worthless, more so than it already is, and more importantly would only validate her father's shitty behavior. She ran away from him for a damn good reason. Basically it was borderline child abuse, so Natsu's pep talk really helps set my mind at ease, only because it's the first thing so far that's plausible and sensical. But Phantom Lord isn't gonna take that lying down. They want payback for having their guild hall raided by Fairy Tale, and they decided that the most effective way to do so was to march their entire guild hall over to Fairy Tale across the ocean and deal with them there. Yeah, the whole building is walking. Apparently, the second floor of the Phantom Lord Guild Hall was always just completely empty and housing a big-ass death cannon with enough power to atomize a city, and Josei thinks it's a good idea to fire it directly at the Fairy Tale Guild, the place where Lucy most likely is. Urza dons her adamantine armor to attempt to block the entirety of the Jupiter cannon, as it's called, and somehow she actually manages to block it. But she's also not totally out of commission for the time being, and Josei takes this opportunity to restate his demands of handing over Lucy Heartfilia. This leads to the Fairy Tale Guild all yelling out that hell no, they're not gonna let a member of their family walk away and go back to a strictly worse life, she's with better company now. Josei's not gonna put up with that either, and in 15 minutes, Jupiter will fire again, killing every single person there. Natsu, Happy, Gray, and this big guy named Chris Sabat, oh, sorry, that's his voice actor, the character is named, Elfman, who's a real manly man, all run or fly towards the Phantom Lord Guild Hall to destroy the Jupiter cannon. Mirajan brings Lucy away, knocks her out, and transforms into her to try to fool Josei, and the rest of the guild simply try to stay alive while a never-ending swarm of regenerating shade demons created by Master Josei. Natsu begins by traveling through the barrel and into this big room with giant lacrima crystals, as they're called, and finds himself facing off against this person, Tonomaru of the Great Flame, the final member of the Elements 4, who can control any fire he wants and even spout different colored flames. He honestly just exists to exacerbate the enormous problem in this scene of the 15 minutes going by far too quickly in-universe. And Natsu doesn't think to fight Tonomaru or break the Jupiter Lacrima without using his Dragon Slayer's fire magic. I only mention that he's a Dragon Slayer since I don't think I've established that yet, until after the fight, so this scene is kind of just an infuriating waste of time. Natsu breaks a lacrima by somehow refusing to let Totemaru control his fire? They never give a good explanation of how that works. And the Jupiter cannon explodes, which causes Josei to transform the entirety of the guild hall into a huge giant that will slowly draw the magic circle of the forbidden spell Abyss Break, which has the power to level the entire city of Magnolia and then some. Is this anime enough now? Oh yeah, Totemaru got frozen by Gray and punched away by Elfman, who can transform his arm to take on the form of beasts he kills. And speaking of Elfman, let's go see what he's up to. While splitting up and searching for the giant's power source, Elfman happens to stumble upon Soul in the hallway, and this whole fight scene is meant to establish who Elfman is and how he got to be the man he is today. See, there's a reason that only his right arm transforms, because the last time he tried to transform his whole body into a super powerful beast that he and his two sisters killed, his mind was lost to the beast, and he murdered his little sister, Lizana, in a primal blood rage. All his real man blustering is just to hide the fact that deep down, he can't forgive himself for killing someone who cared about him so much. Soul was aware of this, and turns Elfman's toxic masculinity against him by casting Merci la vie, French for thank you life, a spell that traps Elfman's mind into reliving the memory of the murder of Lizana for all eternity as it traps his body by slowly turning it to stone. And after a long scene of him completely breaking down at the first reliving of his sororicide, a crying Mira calls out to him. He responds accordingly.
Tell me, why are you crying?
This is when he pulls out the full body takeover and proceeds to lay the smackdown on Soul, utterly obliterating him. But he doesn't quite have control and is still partially lost to the beast until he hears Mira call out to him. And after that, he somehow gains full control of the beast form and saves her from being crushed to death. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. She tried to trick Josei while being disguised as Lucy to get kidnapped instead of her, but Josei gave her a big "no you" and stole her from like a quarter-mile away and tried to slowly crush her with the giant's fingers. After a little familial heart-to-heart, Mira notices that the giant is drawing the Abyss Break magic circle a lot slower than before, about half speed, and figures out that it's being powered by the element 4. Elfman briefly forgets how many he's beaten at this point and recounts them in the absolute worst way.
Well...
1, 2...
I guess that leaves 2 more.
That's in both English and Japanese, by the way, and as many things as I could possibly say about that bit, I want to talk about this little exchange between Natsu and Happy. First, Natsu says it's a good thing that once the fighting is over, there will be no more crazy fighting, and I'm not sure I believe that coming from him. He's always been the type of character who would willingly seek out and start fights with any perceivably strong person he could, including those who could one-shot him with no effort, such as, second, when he immediately suggests that he should go fight Josei because there's currently no Urza or Makarov to take him down. So, this is the best time to mention that one of my biggest complaints about Fairy Tail is that while it sets up fairly good premises at times, the overall writing and characterization are major problem areas, and I wish for the series to improve those. But seeing as how I've watched up to episode 220 of 328, I'm not so sure if that's going to be the case. Cautiously optimistic though. Anyway, Natsu immediately finds himself faced with Arya, who makes my job easy by declaring himself as the strongest of the Element 4, which you'd think would be a bit obvious considering he took Makarov out of the equation early on instantly, but whatever. Honestly, most of this fight happens off-screen during this next fight. As dark rain clouds permeate the giant, Juvia arrives just as Gray does. I'm not really sure how she knows that Totemaru and Soul were beaten, but it's fine, because after Gray gives this line,
"But let's get something straight. I'm not gonna hold back just because you're a chick."
Wow, lots of toxic masculinity today. I hope that doesn't become a trend. She immediately says that she surrenders. Her heart is beating incredibly quickly because apparently she has a strong urge to make him hers, which is totally not weird at all considering they've spoken maybe 3 sentences to each other total, and locks him in a water sphere. While panicking for a bit because he's injured after the guild raid somehow, he takes the chance to freeze and destroy the whole thing.
He must be an ice wizard.
Nah, I'm pretty sure he just sells flowers on the weekends. This is so beautiful to Juvia that she daydreams about some stuff as he readies and fires ice lances at her, all of which completely impale her. But not really, because her body is made entirely of water, I guess. I'm not really sure how that works with daily functioning, but hey, it's pretty nifty if she's able to activate this at will. It's also neat that this power and application of her magic actually transfers over to other arcs, and that's not very common in this series. I should probably mention that Juvia is already madly in love with Gray, and I'm not really sure whether this says more about Juvia being a hopeless romantic or Gray being an extreme lady killer. But I mean, he randomly takes his clothes off all the time regardless of who's around, so I'm gonna have to say the latter. That's his frequent character quirk, by the way, and it stems back to when Ur forced him and Leon to strip down and run to the cold for training. Why did only Gray pick up the strange habit and not Leon? After talking about how after all this, Fairy Tail still is not going to back down, Gray mentions how he'd rather die than give up Lucy. Brushing aside how quickly he and the rest of the guild seem to be to die for other people, this sends Juvia into a blind rage, because this act of love, in her eyes, marks Lucy as a romantic opponent. And now her water can boil Gray alive, an aspect of her power set that is never shown again after this arc, but which is introduced in an honestly fantastic and hilarious way.
Lucy, heart failure cannot be allowed to live!
A+ voice acting from Brina Palencia, great timing from A1, and the fact that this comes directly after the midway break is absolutely incredible. Another neat thing is that after trying to escape and falling, Gray is able to freeze the whole of Juvia's water blast. But then it cuts directly to, hey, how cool would it be if Gray accidentally got a feel of Juvia in, like, the non-consensual way? This is really only an excuse to show off some fan service, but doing this in the middle of a fight is really poor taste, especially since it's meant to give the audience an amount of pleasure that neither character involved is having or even wants right now. Oh, but it's fine since he's such a nice guy because he released her from the ice lock. That makes every amount of sense. God, there really is a lot of this shit happening in this video. Maybe I should just move on. Well, I would move on, but the rain picking up distracted me a bit, as it did with Gray, which leads us to a bit of Juvia's backstory. The rain has followed her everywhere she went her entire life, and because of that, she faced tons of hate from everyone around her because she brought gloom with her. So now, Juvia's really pissed and is trying to kill him.
I'll just have to freeze it again. I can't do it.
Hold on, Gray, maybe give it a few seconds. Extreme changes in temperature don't happen instantly, you might send your body into heat shock. After Gray turns all the rain to ice and unleashes a geyser, Juvia has been defeated. Gray catches her before she could fall to her death, and she's back to being madly in love with him. The rain finally goes away so Juvia can see the sun for the first time in her life, and she passes out in this pretty funny pose. Gray even reacts to it in a really cute way, so I'm kinda happy for this. Even if the thing that triggered her passing out was...
So, you wanna go at it?
Which, god damn it, why do you have to make this joke right now, A1? Hiro Mashima at least phrased it a bit better, letting readers interpret Gray's another round as another round of fighting, you absolute maniacs! Mira and Elfman show up and explain everything to Gray, and we cut to Lucy finally waking up in the emergency hideout, which has totally existed this entire time, giving us the setup of another fight happening there soon, as we cut back to Natsu and Arya. Natsu's already at his limit while Arya has yet to be touched, and I'm a little bit upset that most of this fight happened off screen. At this point, Arya decides to unleash his Drain spell on Natsu, and as his magic power gets sucked away, Urza shows up and knocks Arya away before the spell is completed. Since he now has a worthy opponent, he removes the bandages around his eyes, and now shit's gonna go down. This is basically Rock Lee taking off his weights. Now Arya can fight at full power. And this is happening at the worst possible time, because Abyss Break is nearly finished, just about to be cast and destroy everything. Arya readies Airspace 0, which he says consumes the lives of everyone who enters it, but she is somehow able to cut through the air and completely one-shot Arya. This causes the giant to shut down since there's no element 4 to power it, and we now cut back to that fight I mentioned at the emergency hideout. Once again, most of it happened off-screen, but 3 members of Phantom Lord have been busy toying with Redis' Picto magic and trouncing him, and one of those members is Gajiel. As he starts taking Lucy away, he's intercepted by Loki, who apparently ran as slowly as possible to make sure she's okay. Gajiel picks up that something isn't quite right with Loki, and we now see that, yeah, he's got a point, because he seems to be phasing through reality or something? Maybe his body is just being attacked by some unseen wizard tearing him apart? No, that doesn't seem quite right. But this couldn't come at a worse time for him, since he gets beaten down by Gajiel and trapped in a mirror sphere by a lackey. And having failed at the one thing he came to the shelter to do, he laments to himself that if only he put aside his fear of celestial wizards, maybe he could have come sooner and kept her safe. He calls himself pathetic, says he looks completely pathetic, and mentions the name Karen. We'll pick up on this in a future video, because this is very important to Loki's backstory. Remember this exact shot for later, because it's also very important. Gajiel brings Lucy back to Josei, who broadcasts her screams of agony in the giant's PA system just for fun. There's basically no hope at this point, because he now says that it's time for his favorite part, killing everyone in Fairy Tail, and he's coming down to do it himself. Urza tells Natsu that he needs to find his strength, the one that lies deep within him, which I'll touch on in the next arc, but the only meaningful line here is her saying,
Show me you can surpass me!
Naturally, this sends him into a rage and powers him up again, which is good because he's going to need it. This somehow wakes up Makarov, who slowly gets out of bed to go protect his children. No, they're not his actual children, with one technical exception, but as Guildmaster, he feels he has taken on the role of their collective father. Mira, Elfman, and Gray meet up with Urza, who has somehow put on her armor despite not having it in her speech to Natsu, and they all feel a collective sense of dread, of death, because Master Josei has come to put them all down. Elfman and Gray charge in first and get knocked aside, and Josei takes out Mira before she has the chance to fight. Urza lasts a bit longer, but ultimately does nothing but bluster about how much she loves her guildmates against Josei's unrivaled power. Meanwhile, Gajiel got bored of waiting for Josei to kill everyone, and decided to have some fun torturing Lucy, who lays some smack talk to him about how Phantom Lord does not scare her. This excites him so much that he decides to go all out against her, but Natsu blasts in before he can do so. This next fight may not seem like the big climax, but I assure you it is. As a fight between two Dragon Slayers, this is ultimately the fight that matters the most. Not Josei and whoever can take him down, which I'll get to later, but this one. They appeared to be on equal footing for a bit, even with Gajiel's Evil Dead reference, until he busts out his iron dragon scales, covering his body with scales as hard as steel. You'll notice that the show uses iron and steel interchangeably when talking about his power set, which is weird because steel is considerably stronger than iron and his power set only involves iron. This changes up the fight dynamic and allows Gajiel to utterly pulverize Natsu until a breath attack beam stroke causes his armor to crack like glass? I don't think that's how steel works. Turns out they both can move faster than the human eye can see, as demonstrated by this shot, and after getting tired from that, Gajiel decides to have a quick munch and eat some metal from the surrounding area to get his full strength back. Now Natsu's in a bit of a bad spot, since there's no fire anywhere that he could eat to get his power back, but Lucy aims to fix that. Pulling out the gate key she got from Galuna Island, she asks the new spirit Sagittarius if he can produce any fire of any sort. Unfortunately, he responds that he cannot, as he's just really good at archery, and Gajiel forces Natsu to eat metal as he drags his skull across the room. Remember the Shade Demons attacking the rest of the guild? At this point, they converge into this 6-armed ball of darkness that bashes the guild hall, reducing it to rubble as everyone watches in horror. Natsu reflects on when he first came to Fairy Tail and met the people who would be his new family, as does everyone in the guild and in the surrounding city of Magnolia. These couple shots even overlay the audio of the bright and happy times Natsu had in the past with the absolute despair-inducing visuals of everyone's home, now standing as nothing but broken beams and lost memories. That, along with the music, is extremely powerful, and as Gajiel laughs maniacally, Natsu stands up to fight once more, but he's been made as broken as his home. Until Sagittarius realizes that it doesn't matter where the fire comes from as long as he makes fire, and launches a flurry of arrows into this generator box, causing it to explode, giving Natsu just the energy he needed. After easily dismantling Gajiel, Natsu busts out Flame Lotus Fire Dragon Fist, which, by the way, anytime he uses a spell that starts with Flame Lotus, that's how you know the fight's over. and Gajiel is left beaten and battered. Now we move to watching Urza take an absolute pummeling from Josei, who spouts a lot about bringing Makarov to despair as his guild hall is destroyed and his children get slaughtered right in front of him. Yeah, he's got a bit of a grudge against Fairy Tail for claiming the title of #1 guild and dethroning Phantom Lord, which is honestly his primary motivation for doing all of this. I mean, a direct order from the head of the Heartfilia family to bring his daughter back home was the thing that got him to start this whole mess in the first place, but he's just as concerned with getting revenge as he is delivering Lucy safely. More or less safely, that is. I mean, I imagine she's got a few broken bones, but she's not in danger of dying anytime soon. Unless Gajiel gets bored again. However, on top of getting to satisfy his grudge, he says he's gonna hold Lucy for ransom and bleed the Heartfilia family dry of their fortune. Thankfully, Urza calls him out on his pettiness, almost like every antagonist's motivation of this series so far has been utter bullshit, but that's really all she can do against Josei. He can't be touched at all. And once he's got her in a literal bind and is sucking out her life force, she thinks to herself how she'd rather die than force her guildmates to surrender. So she uses her magic to move the sword Josei knocked away into position and directs it to her back. But before the motion can finish, the darkness over the sky clears away, her body and armor are completely healed and repaired, and she T-poses to assert dominance over Josei out of sheer spite as the spell fades. And through the window comes Master Makarov. This war between Phantom Lord and Fairy Tail has gone on long enough, and it's high time it came to an end. The ensuing chaos is honestly a spectacle to behold. I've harped on the fight scenes for having incredibly limited animation and mostly relying on stills of the aftermath of attacks, but this one? Fully animated, very kinetic, absolute bliss. This is an example of how wonderful a fight can be when it's been given the time and care to be fully animated, and I don't even care that it only lasts a few seconds. It's amazing. After those few seconds, Makarov lectures Josei about being a better role model and gives him until the count of 3 to kneel. He takes that as a challenge and declares his heartlessness as what makes him the stronger Wizard Saint. As he prepares his most powerful spell, Makarov invokes Fairy Law. A flash of heavenly light pierces the sky and nukes the entire area, and as the light dims, Makarov is the only one left standing. Fairy Law is a conditional spell, only affecting those whom the caster deeply and truly sees as their enemy, and Josei fit that description clear as day. As Makarov walks away though, Arya hasn't gotten the message that the war has ended, so Makarov gives him a firmer response. The war is over, Fairy Tail stands victorious. As the arc wraps up its loose ends, we get a couple of really interesting scenes that I feel I must talk about. Firstly, an exhausted Natsu and Gajiel talk to each other about where they both learned their Dragon Slayer magic, and I feel I should clarify this since I failed to do so previously. We already knew this about Natsu since roughly episode 1, but both he and Gajiel learned their magic from dragons, who acted as their surrogate fathers before leaving them suddenly. But the dates in which the Fire Dragon Igneal and the Iron Dragon Metallicana left Natsu and Gajiel respectively line up a little too perfectly to be a mere coincidence. See, the current year in-universe is 784, and 7 years before right now, the year 777, both dragons vanished, on the 7th day of the 7th month. July 7th, 777.
What's with all the sevens, huh?
How should I know?
I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. The whole thing is extremely weird, and it only sort of makes sense to me with just the 220 episodes I've seen, plus having a bit of knowledge on what happens past that. But we literally just now got barely enough information to begin to think about it, so let's just drop it for now and move on. Quick out of this note, I have since then read the manga past those episodes that I've seen, and I am now fully aware of everything that happens in the Fairy Tail story. But I can't go into it right now because I've already written the script and this video is already way later than I wanted to, so we're just gonna continue to move on. As the guild stands in the rubble of their home, and Lucy vocalizes some very understandable but unnecessary apologies, after all, none of this was her fault, who else strolls in but Team Shadowgear? Still injured, but back to lend some support to the emotionally broken, which is great because after a very heartfelt speech from Makarov which ends in this very sweet line.
Hold your head high, my dear, because you are a proud member of the Fairy Tail family.
It's clear that she just needs someone to hold her tight for a little bit. That last part of the line, by the way, touches on something very interesting for this arc. Makarov usually calls it the Fairy Tale Guild, yet this time he calls it the Fairy Tale Family, and that speaks to something. Phantom Lord is a guild, sure, but they don't treat the other members like anything more than disposable fodder to be used and then thrown away when they reach the end of their usefulness. Makarov believes a guild should be more than that. They should be a family. And that's good because, man, did she ever need a family that isn't completely abusive. At this point, the guild hall is going to be rebuilt mostly off-screen to be even bigger and better than before, but there's a couple glimpses of what happened to Phantom Lord. We see that Juvia is now stalking Gray, which is not ideal, but as long as she doesn't start hurting people, then I think it's okay. We also see Loki back after searching for apparently days for Lucy's keys, but something's a bit off with him. He's always been the kind of ladies' man who constantly has a very high energy, which often gets used to hit on women only when they're okay with it, but no such energy today. As he walks away, we get this line from him.
Karen, you don't have to rush me. Please. I need more time.
Okay, this doesn't mean anything right now, but it does tie directly into his backstory, which does get revealed in some filler episodes right before the next arc, the Tower of Heaven, and I will cover them later in a much shorter video since they are extremely important for the rest of the series, just trust me on this, but there's a more pressing matter at hand right now. This is more of an epilogue to the arc, but Lucy isn't anywhere to be found. Not at the guild construction site, not in her apartment, and not in all of Magnolia City. She's gone back home, willingly. After all the shitty, awful things her father did to try to force her to come back home, she's finally decided to listen to him. We get a few scenes of flashbacks of his aforementioned shitty behavior, as well as present Lucy reconnecting with the groundskeepers and maids that she grew up with, making us really feel like she's given in to her father's demands completely. And he spells out his intentions very plainly. He wanted that guild of ruffians eradicated, because a lady of her stature deserves better than them, and that her being with them forced him to go to the extremes he did. That this is all her fault. This is just an abuser trying to justify his abuse. There's nothing genuine about anything he's saying, and Lucy knows it. Because see, she didn't come back to make amends. She came back to tell him to eat shit and fuck right off. Money means nothing to her. She's finally happy with those so-called ruffians of her new family. But hold on, if that's the case, why did she pretend to everyone that she was going to stay for good? She took all that time getting into her incredibly fancy and very hard to move and dress to see her father, only to decide to use it to help emphasize her point, which the camera takes as an opportunity to say, "Did you know Lucy has boobs?" as a power move? I mean, I guess the power move makes sense, but maybe tell the maids that you're only visiting to tell your dad to literally eat shit so they don't get completely heartbroken when you leave? Anyway, with this, she leaves her abusive father behind, and returns to the friends who care for her so much that they ran all the way from Magnolia to the Hartfield Manor to bring her back to her real home. And with that, the arc is done. Okay, I know how long this video has been, I know that, but there's only 2 quick things to go. All this guild-on-guild action is great and all, but what good is it without a sense of theming and purpose? Overall, I'd say this arc touches on the idea of breaking apart one's past from one's present, allowing people to refuse to go along with what they were forced to do in the past with the hopes of a better future for themselves and possibly even others. This is pretty neat in that it can be applied to both Lucy and Jose, as both of them broke away from what had bound them in the past. Lucy with her father, and Jose with the rules prohibiting direct inter-guild conflict. One may be far more legally serious than the other, but I ultimately think that this is the strongest theming the series has had so far, since nearly every encounter has been a clash of both sides of this theme. Finally, to bring this arc to a close, the arbitrary ranking. Previous arcs have weighed in at a 3 out of 10 for Lullaby, and 6 out of 10 for Galuna Island. So where would the Phantom Lord arc fall here? I'm gonna have to say a 7. I can't exactly say that we understand Lucy more in the same way I did Gray, but we at least know where she came from and can compare her to who she was then to see some implied character development. Before I leave for now, I'm going to use the next video in the series as a bit of a break in form. The filler in between arcs likes to have little bits of important plot sprinkled in, such as what's up with Loki, and there's really no way I can include them into these videos organically or make separate short videos on their own since they're too short to mean anything really. So I'm instead going to make periodic videos detailing all of the important filler content that happens in between arcs. The next video will be everything from before Lullaby to in between Phantom Lord and the next arc, the Tower of Heaven. So stick around, or don't because it'll be a while before I upload again, and I will see you then. I'm Van Campone, and I will see you guys next time.